You know, it may just be time for me to cop to the fact that I will never be finished talking about She-Ra. Okay, so a bit of another addendum to the addendum I already did. Here in the break room, there was something that I didn't bring up in either my initial review or my initial addendum video. And I think it's because I didn't fully appreciate what it was doing. Not that I didn't like it. It just wasn't on my list of priorities. But I want to re-examine yet again the way in which the show went about redeeming the character of Catra. And in doing that, I failed to talk about Melog. Melog is the shape-shifting cat thing that kind of adopts Catra. And the two of them form a connection. There's a couple of things that are really important about this. The first thing to mention, though, this is not important, but I do enjoy this. The concept was pulled from Catra in the original version. I don't know if it ever appeared in the cartoon or if it was only like in the mini comics, but she had a cat that she rode, a bit like how He-Man rode Thundercat, called Claudine. It was kind of a pink lion. Apparently, Noelle Stevenson and the writers opted not to adapt that directly because the design or the idea of kind of a pink lion-y thing felt very similar to something the Steven Universe does. And so what they did was they combined the concept with a one-off villain from the show, a shapeshifter called Melog. So they took the name Melog and the shape-shifting aspect, but had it shift into something that was more representative of Claudine. So just its initial inception I kind of like. I remember hearing, and I couldn't source this, so I don't know its accuracy, but it's the perfect description anyway. I had heard at one point that the writer's room referred to this as Catra's therapy pet. And that is, in a lot of ways, what it is. But as much as that sounds like a cute thing, I kind of want to dive into that a bit. So when I did my first video prior to the release of Season 5, talking about redemption for Catra and how it could be done, there were a number of things I talked about. Well, one of the things I talked about was she needs to build a new relationship with people that she hasn't destroyed everything about their connection the way, or damaged it repeatedly the way that she has with Entrapta, Adora, Scorpia. And my suggestion at the time was that she was going to have to, go off with other people that were either new, but I didn't feel like that would be as rewarding, or who she hadn't damaged things as much. My suggestion at the time being Kyle, Rogelio, and Lonnie. So I've already talked about how the show was way smarter than me because I'd made the assumption that if they were going to try and redeem Catra, they were going to do it at the very end of the season, but they didn't. They brought her over and reconnected her with the good guys in episode 5, which meant that she could spend the next 8 episodes processing and working on it. And so there was time taken that I assumed wouldn't be available. So that was thing one where they were smarter than I was. The other thing, though, when I have my suggestion of she needs to connect with something fresh, or at least not as damaged, and to work on herself that way, they kind of do that, but again, they did it in a more clever way than I would have thought of. And let me be really clear about things. I really love when writers and showrunners and creators do something that accomplishes what I wanted the story to accomplish in a way I wouldn't have thought of. I love reading stuff from people who are better at this than me. So they do kind of do that, but rather than have it be a case of, well, she can't have this reconnection with Adora, Scorpia, Entrapta, and those sorts of people. She needs to do it cleanly with this people, with whatever is new, in this case, Melog. What they actually ended up doing was she gets the fresh start with Melog as a way to start to work on herself so that reconnecting with these other people is more possible, which is brilliant. That is just a really smart way to do it. And it does sort of validate my hope that they were going to address the fact that she kind of needed a clean start with something. And that is part of the purpose of a therapy pet. I've never had one myself, but the idea is that you build a connection with something that you don't have the baggage with, that you can't let down because it doesn't have the expectations of people in your everyday life. Because that's a big part of recursion and the slipping into bad habits for people who tend to be self-destructive or to lash out or to otherwise lean towards the toxic end of relationships. There's a tendency to depict toxic people like Catra as simply cruel, and they get off on the cruelty, which this show has never done. It was very clear that at various points that Catra was incredibly lonely. And this toxicity wasn't born out of a desire to just cause pain in a vacuum. She did want to hurt people, but it was a transference of her hurt and wanting to inflict it on other people, which does not excuse anything she did. Let me be very clear. The reason I bring this up is that it's easier to think of people being toxic just because they enjoy hurting people. But the thing is, and the thing that I wanted this show to do, and which it did, which is that if you have a pattern of toxic or hurtful or just untrustworthy or duplicitous behavior, and you've been doing that for long enough, that's a habit. And habits are hard to break, even if you want to. And that is why turning on a dime redemption would have been the absolute worst thing, which thankfully they didn't do. But it does address the idea that you can't just suddenly be okay with the relationships you had before. Oftentimes a big part of trying to get better is building new habits, but that's really hard to do with people who your history with is being in the bad habits. And a clean start with a person or a pet can help greatly because you can build on an unblemished foundation, something that isn't cracked and broken and damaged by all the stuff that you've done. And in a relationship with something that you don't have those habits of behaving this way towards. That's not to say that it's still not going to be some degree of work to not slip into those habits, but it's going to be easier to catch yourself because you're not used to behaving this way towards this thing or this person. The value of a fresh start when you're trying to get better in terms of your own behavior is immeasurable. And I'm so glad the show thought to do it. I like the way that they did it. I like how they managed to find that balance where by initiating this new relationship allowed Catra to get in a position where she was better equipped to start to try and work on her existing relationships. Because it was so funny. I had the things that I absolutely didn't want the show to do if they were going to try and redeem Catra, mainly because I'd seen things go wrong with that kind of thing before. And my assumption was, well, we've got to go to the far end. She actually can't fix the relationships that she's broken, Scorpia, Adora, and Trapta. But the show went, well, no, we don't have to throw the baby out in the bathwater. We won't do the mistakes that all these other shows will do. We will take the time, we'll give her a clean relationship, but that doesn't mean that this doesn't get to reconnect. We still get to work and earn it, and they did, and I love it. This show is so good, you guys. Another thought on She-Ra, some thoughts on Melog and the way that it was used. This show's so good. I might be done talking about it for the time being. Unless I put together another music video, which I'm thinking about. In any case, whatever your thoughts are on this, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, subscribe. There's a link to my Patreon and other stuff that I do, but no pressure, really, because we take a nice laid-back attitude here. So just come on back next time you need a break.